here's the second video that I promised that's going over race and racism as academics understand it. So I will post a PowerPoint. So I'm going to move through this a little quickly because you will have the PowerPoint. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so PowerPoint is entitled Race as Social Construct. So what you want to remember here is that when we talk about social constructs, we're talking about something that society makes up. So a construct, you think about the word construction, it's again, it's made up, it's something that we built, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and move on from there. So questions to consider: what is race? Is race biological? That should be a question mark. What are racial stereotypes? How do we learn race? And what is racism? And hopefully this PowerPoint will address all those questions and answer them. So when we talk about race, the first thing we want to do is we want to remember that race is not biological at all. Race is a historical concept. So that means that race is about, it's contextualized. So that means it's about race is determined, and how you understand race is determined by where you're born, when you're born, what groups you're born to or consider yourself a member of, right? So not biological, it is a socio-historical concept, not a biological one. So what that means is that if it's not biological, if it's something we've made up, if it has a socio-historical context, that means that race can look differently in different parts of the world. And it also means, you know, that how we understand race can change, which is super hopeful for me. So the first point, again, is this idea that race is not biological, it is a social construct. And so all these things that we attribute to biological differences in terms of race, like skin color and hair color and eye shape, they are not, in fact, they don't in fact point to biological differences. So another way to understand this is that as someone who you know will be racially classified as Black, I could have more in common with someone whose racial classification would be Asian or white or Latino than I would with another person who's Black. So genetically, I can have more in common with someone outside of my racial group than I would with someone inside of my racial group. And that happens. That's more the norm than not. So that's a really strong argument for this idea that race is in fact not biological, but it is in fact a social construct. All right, so if it's a social construct, if it's something that's made up by societies, that means that it has to be taught. And the easiest way to get to this is to kind of talk about it in terms of, or to kind of take a step back and talk about it in terms of gender. So gender is not biological sex. There is such a thing as biological sex. You are either born male or female, and you have to, until very recently, you wrote that out. Gender is not biological sex. Gender would be the roles and rules assigned traditionally and historically to people based on their biological sex. So for example, historically in America, men have been, the roles and rules assigned to men have been, you know, leader and logical and capable and aggressive and smart, whereas the roles that have been assigned to women have been, you know, submissive and emotional and illogical and not leaders, right? So these are roles and rules assigned. If I look at, you know, who is assigned what or in terms of gender, then I can see that, you know, gender roles tend to benefit men and they hurt women. And that makes sense because historically men have been in a position of power in American and Western society, so they got to make up the rules. Race works the same way. So if you look at racial, you know, rules and roles assigned to race and racial categories, they tend to benefit the group that is in power, and in this case, the group would be whites. If we're looking at, you know, how race and racism play out in the Western world. And that makes sense, right? Because historically, whites have been in power. So again, if whoever, it's like a kid in the playground, whoever has the most power gets to make up the rules. And those rules usually benefit the folks in power. What you also want to remember about these rules is that, and rules is that they're stereotypes, and they're not true. They're just, you know, stereotypes. It's what we assign to certain groups. But a stereotype is never a stereotype, you know. So stereotypes are, again, those roles and rules assigned to a particular group. They work just so racial stereotypes work just like gender stereotypes do. And I've already talked about this, but stereotypes work to keep those in power, and keep those who are powerless powerless. That's the whole point of the stereotype. So again, if I go back to gender stereotypes have been in place historically and traditionally to keep men in power and to keep women powerless. Racial stereotypes historically and traditionally are in place to keep whites in power, and to keep all other racial groups powerless. So the rules and roles always serve to justify the treatment of the group, right? So the stereotypes justify the treatment of the group, and the position of the group in a particular society. So the stereotypes tend to uphold racial hierarchy and racial inequality. So again, if race is, you know, something that's constructed, it's something that's taught, and it's almost, you know, insidious or invisible how it's taught, right? So it's taught by family and our friends and our neighborhoods and schools and mass media and our history and representation and socioeconomic class, and it's kind of enforced by white privilege and beauty standards and social norms, right? So we learn race. We just pick it up, and if we're not careful, we tend not to see it unless it has a direct impact on our lives. So race is taught, just like gender is taught, race is taught. And so you can ask anyone, you know, what are some stereotypes of Black people or white people or Asian, whatever. And if you grow up in this culture, we all know those stereotypes, and we all know that the stereotypes serve to justify the position and treatment of those racialized groups in society. So if race is constructed, again, that means race is contextual. And so this can mean that different countries have a different understanding of race in America, and in some ways that's true, and in other ways it's not that true at all. So, if, for example, if I go someplace in the United Kingdom, any person or many non-whites consider themselves as Black as a way of consolidating political and social power. If I go to a place like Brazil, you know, America, we have like maybe 4 or maybe 5 categories of race. If I go to some place like Brazil, it could be as many as 18 or 20. So race looks different in different places, right? It's contextual. It looks different in different times. And then what that means, you know, I think hopefully is that how we understand race can change, because we made it up. It's like we can change it. We can. So the other thing is that race is a modern idea. So the idea of race, the way we see it is that, you know, or the way that most people are taught to think about race is that race is, you know, biological, and that these biological differences between races kind of point to these innate characteristics or traits, right? That's a fairly new understanding of race. So before the 1500s, when Europeans encountered um, the rest of the world in mass, people didn't think about race in those ways. And so when Europeans encountered, colonized, conquered the rest of the world, they had to find a way to do it that kind of justified the colonization and exploitation and conquering. And one of the ways, I think, or the key justification, was this kind of new definition of race, where it was, because you look differently than I do, you are inherently inferior. And in a lot of instances, you are inherently not human. Therefore, I can conquer, exploit, colonize. So race actually served as a justification for that. But before all this happened, before you had Europeans, you know, encountering different people in different places en masse and encountering, conquering, colonizing. The term race was used in Europe to denote nationality or ethnicity. So for example, the Irish were considered a race, or the British were considered a race, or the Italians were considered a race. So again, race is a social construct. It's created by society. It's not biological. It's created to uphold a racial hierarchy, right? Where one group is at the top and other groups are at the bottom. Again, gender works the same way. Gender is there to uphold a hierarchy where men are at the top and women are at the bottom. Race and racial stereotypes always justify how racial groups are viewed and treated in society, and it also justifies the position that racial groups have, like on that kind of racialized ladder. Okay, so here's a definition of racism from dictionary.com. So it's the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race. And again, that's that biological understanding of race, which is not good. Like, it leads to all kinds of awfulness, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. So what that means is that race and racism is institutionalized, right? If we learn it from our teachers and our family and our peers and our mass media, and it's in all of our institutions, it's in our schools, it's in our healthcare, it's all those places, that means it's institutionalized and it's systemic. So it's not only about the individual, and I think when we focus on the individual, you miss the point. Like, so this person is racist, or this person said something racist. It misses the point. The larger point is, how do we change and reconstruct these systems, these institutionalized systems, so that no one is racist, right? And again, racism exists in our laws, policies, schools. It's literally in every aspect of our culture. That's it. So one more thing, so you're gonna watch this PowerPoint, and the final thing is that on the syllabus, it says that you can rewrite papers, and you get like a couple of more points for rewriting them. So let's not do that, because I'm not sure if it's a good use of your time. Instead, my offer is that you wait till the end of the semester and you can rewrite whatever paper is your lowest grade, and I will just take the highest grade. So for example, if you wrote a paper and it was a C, and then at the end of the semester you kind of went back and rewrote the paper again and it was an A, I'm not going to average it. I'm not going to just add a couple of points. I will drop the lowest grade and take the highest grade for the paper. And I think that makes more sense, because you should be a better writer at the end of the semester. All right, so again, I'll post another video on Friday, going over the midterm exam and giving you some hints and a close reading of the article. And have a good week, and I'll see you guys Friday.